All right, let's jump right in. Imagine you're living on an entire continent that's always felt safe, protected by its sheer size and remoteness. And then one day, that feeling is just gone. A global rivalry doesn't just show up on the news, it shows up right on your doorstep. That's exactly what happened to Australia.
You see, for pretty much its entire modern history, Australia has had this incredible buffer. The geography itself was its greatest defense. I mean, we're talking about vast, vast oceans. The Pacific, the Indian, that acted like a natural fortress, keeping all the big global conflicts way over there at a very safe distance.
But in 2026, that all changed. That whole sense of security is now being seriously questioned. The entire strategic map has been redrawn, and that protective buffer, well, it's now become a potential frontline. So let's get into the specific event that kicked this whole thing off.
So what was it that happened? Well, a Chinese naval task force just appeared. And not where you might expect, like the heavily contested South China Sea. Nope. They showed up in international waters, but right off the Australian coast. This was a massive signal. It was basically China saying, hey, that era of you guys watching great power competition from afar, that's over.
And look, this wasn't just some random patrol boat. We're talking about a pretty sophisticated group of ships, a guided missile destroyer, a frigate, and a massive replenishment ship. And that supply ship? That's actually the key piece of the puzzle. It shows they have the legs to operate thousands of miles from home for a long time. They took a very deliberate route, sailing all the way around the continent. And get this, they didn't even try to hide. This was a parade, a calculated show of force, plain and simple.
Okay, so that leads us to the big question. Why? Why would China send a naval group on such a public, in-your-face tour around Australia? Well, this wasn't just about sailing. This was what you'd call naval diplomacy, and it had a whole bunch of different layers to it.
Think of it as a mission with a checklist. First, it was a major show of strength. They were demonstrating to the world, hey, our Navy isn't just a coastal force anymore. We're a global blue water Navy. Second, it was absolutely a form of psychological pressure. It forced Australia to react, to scramble its own ships and planes to track them, which cost time and money. And third, on a very practical level, it was an intelligence-gathering mission. They were mapping the seabed, listening to signals, and probably timing how long it took the Aussies to respond. Super valuable intel.
So the unspoken message, the real takeaway from this whole voyage, was loud and clear. It was basically China saying, we are here, we are watching you, and we can reach you. It was all about demonstrating that reach and capability, making Australia feel a lot less like an isolated island fortress and a lot more exposed.
Right, so this whole event really puts the spotlight on the two main naval players in this part of the world, China's People's Liberation Army Navy and the Royal Australian Navy. And when you put them side by side, well, you start to see a pretty massive difference in scale.
It really is a bit of a David versus Goliath situation. On one side, you've got the Plan, the world's largest navy by the sheer number of ships, and they're rolling out aircraft carriers and advanced warships like crazy. On the other side, you have the Royal Australian Navy, super professional, highly advanced, but significantly smaller. And they have to defend an entire continent. So you can see right away Australia can't win a numbers game. They can't go toe-to-toe, ship for ship. They have to think differently.
And that different way of thinking has a name. It's called asymmetric warfare. The whole idea is, if you can't match your opponent in size, you get smart. You invest in things that give you a disproportionate punch. Things that make any potential attack just way too costly for the other guy. Think about it like this. A single, super advanced, long-range missile or one really quiet, stealthy submarine could take out a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier. It's about making the price of admission for a fight just too darn high. And that's exactly the path Australia is heading down.
So, what is Australia actually doing about all this? Well, their response is basically a two-pronged strategy. It's a mix of military muscle and diplomatic outreach, all designed to secure its place in the region. Okay, so let's break down that dual approach. First, you've got the hard power piece. This is the big stuff, like the AUKUS Security Pact with the US and UK to get nuclear-powered submarines. We're also talking major investments in long-range missiles. This is all about creating that credible deterrent we just talked about. Then you've got the soft power side. This is called the Pacific Step-Up, and it's all about boosting aid, helping with infrastructure, and just generally being the best partner possible for the surrounding Pacific Island nations. The idea is to be both a strong neighbor and a good friend. And that second point, the Pacific Step-Up, brings us to the bigger picture here. Because this whole thing isn't just about warships and missiles. The real game, the one being played every single day, is a non-military battle for influence.
And it's happening all across the Pacific Islands, which is literally Australia's backyard. What we're seeing is China using what's often called checkbook diplomacy. They're coming in and funding huge infrastructure projects, roads, ports, stadiums, things these smaller nations desperately need. But here's the catch. This can create massive debt, leading to fears of a debt trap. That's where a country can't pay back its loans, and China might say, okay, instead of the money, we'll take control of your port for 99 years. It's a way to gain strategic leverage. On top of that, China is also getting involved in security, providing things like police training and surveillance tech. It offers a whole model for development that doesn't come with all the usual strings and, let's call them lectures, from the West.
But amidst all this talk of strategy and geopolitics, it's so important to remember that we're talking about people's homes. For those living on the Pacific Islands, this isn't some grand chessboard. It's their reality. And this quote from a Pacific Island elder just hits it perfectly. "We are like small fish. When the big sharks fight, we get hurt." It really captures their tough spot, caught between these giants, wanting the benefits of friendship but terrified of getting crushed in the rivalry.
And this really gets us to the heart of the whole issue, because everything we've talked about is seen through two completely different and frankly irreconcilable points of view.
On the one hand, you have Beijing's narrative. They call it a peaceful rise. They argue they're just acting like any other great power, modernizing their military to protect their vital trade routes. They'll say these naval patrols are perfectly legal, totally transparent, and not aimed at anyone. And they accuse the West of being stuck with a Cold War mentality. But then you have the Western view. They see a power grab. They look at that same naval voyage and call it an act of intimidation. They point to China's economic pressure on countries and its building of military bases on islands as proof of a bigger, more aggressive plan to dominate the region. So one thing is for sure, that era of comfortable geographic isolation for Australia is over. It now finds itself right on the front line of a brand new strategic reality. You've got these two incredibly powerful currents, two different visions for the future, flowing through the Pacific. And the big defining question for everyone in the region is, can these two currents pass each other by peacefully, or is a collision at some point simply inevitable?